I'm Jackie Carrera with the Santa Barbara Foundation, and you're watching The Good Life.
Welcome to Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. So glad you're with us. You can always find us at goodlifetelevision.org, where you can see all the interviews. There's over 100 wonderful people, all walks of life, business, philanthropy, overcomers. It's an amazing group. So all those interviews are there in the long form, and then you can also see what we call power clips, where you can get kind of some of the gold from those interviews. But we've loved seeing so many of you from all over the world join us at goodlifetelevision.org, as well as our social media site. So thank you, and we're so glad you're with us. I'm really excited about my guest today. Jackie Carrera is with me. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Jackie's the president and CEO of the Santa Barbara Foundation, which is Santa Barbara is where we're sitting, and has been for the last couple of years. We're going to talk about that. Prior to joining the foundation, Jackie was the president and CEO of the Parks and People Foundation in Maryland for over 2 decades, where that organization became a major national leader in many areas in urban parks and recreation, ecosystem research and education, job training, workforce development. We were talking before we came on about some of the stuff that they did. It's phenomenal. So Jackie came out here to work at the Santa Barbara Foundation, but not as the president and CEO. And so we were talking before we came on, you came out and then you ended up 2 years in becoming the leader, and there wasn't much of a honeymoon. They greeted you with a worldwide pandemic. Talk about your kind of the first couple of years here.
Well, I was thrilled to be able to come in and work under our former president and CEO, Ron Gallo. He had a long history in community foundations, and my role was to be the Chief Revenue and Business Development Officer. And in community foundations, we're sort of a hybrid between private foundations and regular old nonprofit organizations. We don't do direct service, so what we do is we raise money and we engage donors throughout our community to pool resources and mobilize resources, and then invest them in our nonprofit organizations and in our nonprofit sector to do just incredible work all throughout our county. So my job was to bring in the money and meet our donors and figure out how we could match their charitable interests with the needs in our community.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's what I was going to ask. If you're a donor or even, I did this job, I was a financial advisor. I'm sure you work with a lot of financial advisors.
Yeah.
What's the benefit? So to speak, I mean, let's pretend like somebody's never heard of the Santa Barbara Foundation and they're a donor, they're a high net worth, or they're a financial advisor. What's the benefit of working with Santa Barbara Foundation?
Yeah. So first of all, we are a community foundation, so we are rooted in community. We've been around since 1928, so 93 years, yeah. So that's a lot of history. We know a lot about Santa Barbara County, from Santa Maria in North County and all the wonderful communities up there, Guadalupe, Orchid, all the way down the 101 along the south coast to Goleta, Santa Barbara, Carpinteria, and everything in between in the valley and out to Cuyama. And lots of players, people that are working really hard to improve the quality of life where they live. And so there's a lot of information that's been accumulated in the Santa Barbara Foundation. And I think when we partner with donors, one of the things that we often hear is that the value that we add is that we are able to share that information, not only about who's who and who's doing what, but where is the need? What's really going on? We have, this is something that's very unique to the Santa Barbara Foundation, an Office of Evaluation and Learning. And so we learn every day new things about our community. We collect data, we collect information. So we're not just, transactional, moving money from a donor to, say, a nonprofit organization. We're really working in partnership with the community to figure out, what is it that we need to be paying attention to, and where are those gaps and needs in our community, and then sharing that information back with our donors so that they can make the kinds of investments that they're dreaming to make.
So it's almost like a philanthropic advisory kind of...
In fact, that is a certification that...
That is it?
It is. It's a real thing. Okay, yes, we have philanthropic advisors, yes. And that's what so we have a couple, there are two sides to the house. There's the program side and that works with nonprofit organizations that both do grant making, but also we have the collaboration for social impact. And so we're working with nonprofit organizations throughout Santa Barbara County to figure out where what the sector needs. You know, where are the gaps for the sector? What do we need to be doing to provide training or other resources? So that's that side of the house. The other is the philanthropic advisors who are just ready and waiting and to work with the philanthropists throughout the community who want to make a difference. And we do philanthropic plans. You know, we talk about their legacy, we talk about their interests, and there are so many vehicles to accomplish just donating and contributing financially to your community. And a lot of times people don't just want to contribute financially. They actually want to engage with a nonprofit organization, and we make those connections.
That's
yeah.
And I'm just assuming you report, I mean, the results.
Yes.
I mean, which is a wonderful thing.
We do, and in fact, we're developing reports right now. We love reports. Because we have a lot of data, and so we feel that there's a tremendous responsibility to analyze the data, process the data, distribute the data, communicate it, and so in a way that people can use it, and most importantly that we are actually moving the needle on some of the real issues that are happening in our community. Yeah,
it's about results.
Exactly.
I have a friend who wrote a book. He was in leadership and nonprofits for a long time, and he wrote a book called Measuring What Matters.
Yeah.
Have you heard of that?
No, but I've been in results-based evaluation
terminology
sessions this week, all week.
But it is a really important thing that I think sometimes gets overlooked.
Yeah.
Let's talk about response to crisis. We've had a few around here, and in your time here, you came in right about the time where there was a response needed to the Thomas Fire and the flood, and then we have COVID.
Right.
Talk about, and I know you've raised $2.3 million or something in your emergency grant program for COVID, but talk about how the Santa Barbara Foundation steps in those times.
So it's, I'm sorry to say that we've gotten pretty good at this disaster relief business, but through practice, we've, over the years, living where we live, we're exposed, of course, to natural disasters, and then also always being aware of the crises that exist in our communities, too. So our infrastructure is actually set up to be able to mobilize resources very quickly in times of disaster. So the Thomas Fire and debris flow, one of the first things we did was we stood up a disaster relief fund, and we partnered with the United Way of Santa Barbara County, and they were able to provide something that we didn't have the expertise in and didn't have the infrastructure to do, and so we knew we didn't need to do that, and that's the beauty of partnerships. They made grants and gave financial assistance to individuals and families while we focused on the nonprofit sector. And we did that both in the immediate wake of the disaster and then all the way through the recovery period. And the Thomas Fire and debris flow had a beginning, there was a middle, and there's somewhat of an end, in that we were able to kind of map out that process and what needs to happen each step of the way. With the pandemic, there was no roadmap for this. This was a complete unknown, and we didn't know how long it was going to last, who was going to be affected, how they were going to be affected. And it was, it was really hitting people financially, emotionally, spiritually, physically. I mean, it was something we had just never seen before. So we stood up our fund again. We partnered with our partners at the United Way. They mobilized the resources to get the dollars to individuals and families, and we did nonprofits. We also, this time, knowing that this was a much, much bigger scale problem that was affecting, it was a global crisis, we reached out to the philanthropic community right away in Santa Barbara County. And it was, I mean, if there's a silver lining, there was just something incredible that happened one day in March of last year when we proposed the idea of a collaborative, a funders collaborative. So we knew we were going to be doing our fundraising for the Community Disaster Relief Fund, but we asked the philanthropic community to become partners, and we didn't even know what that meant at the time. But we ended up building this collaborative, and over the course of the last 11 or 12, 13 months now, we've mobilized over $39 million in Santa Barbara County because of all of the just kind-hearted, really dedicated funders that we have in this community. They're family foundations, they're private foundations, they're individuals who just stepped up. And so what we did is we just served as a facilitator for that collaborative. We just tracked what everybody was doing and asked them, would you be willing to provide the data, as we talked about, because that's important to know where the money is going, how much money is going there, where is the need, where are the gaps. And so we were able to really kind of fill in the color around that picture for everybody and make the greatest impact, I think, as a result.
That's amazing. I was reading in 2018, you guys had kind of a 5-year strategic plan, and one of the quotes I read was that you're focused on supporting the most vulnerable population by addressing basic human needs. Talk about that and how, the heart of Santa. Crises aside, if we can for a minute, just your normal operating and your heart for addressing basic human needs.
Yeah, so the Santa Barbara Foundation, we stand on the shoulders of the most amazing philanthropists. You imagine, 93 years. There are so many great people who have stepped forward to help our community, and you can see our footprint, our fingerprints, whatever you want to say that, on every community in Santa Barbara County. And I mean, from hospitals to arts institutions to all kinds of schools, everywhere you look, you can see the Santa Barbara Foundation. Over the course of the last 10 years, I would say, there was just this elevated awareness that there's disparity and it's growing and it needs to be addressed. And we're talking about basic needs now. We're talking about being having the 3rd highest child poverty rate in California. In Santa Barbara County, that's crazy. 10% of our community is food insecure. And we're in the breadbasket of America. Like, there's a major disconnect here, and you just can't turn a blind eye to these things. So, so the Santa Barbara Foundation, this is before my time, so I can say I'm really proud of the team that got together and prioritized these basic needs: food, access to food, shelter, and addressing the homelessness issue, behavioral health. And then access to healthcare. Healthcare, 10% of our population is uninsured, and then even more are underinsured. And so, you lay a pandemic over just regular times, and our crisis is even greater for families. And then the other part of our strategic plan was to address not just the most vulnerable, but working families, because big part of our life here in Santa Barbara, we've got working families who pay a large percentage, as we all well know, of our salaries to housing. And then we have, if you have kids, you throw them in there, we have childcare costs that are astronomical. Right. And when you put your budget together, and I just actually did this for a presentation, you just put the basics, your house, your food, your childcare, you have nothing left at the end of the day. And our workforce sector here is mostly Tier 3 or service industry. So you've got people trying to work part-time jobs, not having insurance, and having all these expenses that it just costs to live in Santa Barbara County. So it's really, the working family is a big priority for us. And I would just say that the pandemic, again, circling back to that, we saw just how close to that edge they are, because we saw more people in food lines, childcare closed, all the centers closed. Right. That caused a lot of issues for our working families. So that's a big priority for us as well.
So let's take that. So the working families, because what you said is just spot on. I mean, in terms of what the reality of what people are facing. Mm-hmm. What's an example of how you would address that? Is it a partnership with a nonprofit, a food bank, or we'll give an example of that?
I love that you led with, is it a partnership? Because I think that partnerships are key to everything that we do. And that's true across all sectors, whether it's government or corporations, when you're trying to make improvements to the quality of life in your community, no one can do it alone. And so partnerships are absolutely critical. I'll take, for example, I'll do two, childcare. We are working with Planning Council and Resource and Referral. There's some amazing organizations here that are working on providing resources to both for-profit and nonprofit childcare partners. And so we are at that table, and we are sponsoring and helping to provide support to keep those coalitions and those collaboratives going, so that we're streamlining resources, we're getting resources to where they need to be at the grassroots level.
And that would bring the cost down.
Yeah, and the other piece that we're working on there is twofold, actually. One is access, so more spots. If you try to, I know this was true of me, and this was on the East Coast when my children were young, but you had to have your child on the list, like at birth, to get them into childcare when they were 2 and 3 years old. And that same situation is here. There's just not enough spots for the number of kids that we have. So, and then you want quality care for your kids, and we have amazing childcare workforce. But I don't know if you've ever looked at being a child care worker, but it's probably not going to sustain most lifestyles. That, yeah. So, and then you have, again, you lay a pandemic over something like that. A lot of the child care workforce lives in other places. And so say you take the Thomas Fire debris flow, where you don't have access to get to our area. Now your workforce has been cut off. And with the pandemic, centers closed, and you have a workforce that has been has sort of evaporated. We're trying to rebuild that as well. So addressing the workforce, addressing access, addressing quality, all of those things are what we work on as we focus on childcare as an issue. With workforce development, right now we just partnered with the Workforce Investment Board and the chambers to do a survey of how businesses, and we're including nonprofit organizations being one of the largest employers in our county, in that, to look to see how the pandemic affected businesses. And then we will be developing out of that strategies with our partners at Hancock and lots of other places to figure out how we can rebuild the workforce and reinforce the workforce as we move forward out of this pandemic. So,
wow.
Just a couple of examples there.
No, that's great. As you look out, and now that you're the leader, but as you look out 5 or 10 years, what do you see? I mean, in your mind's eye, in terms of, I mean, you've talked about a lot, but is there anything kind of that stands out that if you'd love to see happen in the next 5 or 10 years for Santa Barbara Foundation?
For the foundation? Well, I'm not sure if I'm a realist with a dose of optimism or an optimist grounded in realism. I'm not really sure, but I do tend to have a little bit of optimism in my view. Keeps me going every day. But I do think that what I see, what I've seen since in the time that I've been in Santa Barbara County, we have unbelievably strong nonprofit organizations. We had the benefit of working with city and county government through this process, and we have some amazing civil servants in this community. I also had the opportunity to work with our sister foundations in Ventura, and so the Ventura Community Foundation, and then in San Luis Obispo. And so Vanessa Bechtel and Heidi McPherson are the leaders there, and we've talked a lot about, it's great to work in our own communities and to break down silos and build partnerships and strengthen that social fabric to be able to address issues going forward. But we aren't ourselves we are if we look at ourselves in a silo, but we're not. We are connected to our surrounding region. And so to the extent that we're able to take some of these issues and look at them regionally, I think we will also be stronger in the next 5 to 10 years.
So you're thinking
yeah.
bigger in terms of working together with these other geographic
I think
areas.
that we would be better off if we did that, yes.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
How did you get into all this? What was your background? How did you decide, or what happened to your heart where you decided, I'm going to go into this kind of work as an executive?
It's a great question. So I was a finance major. I wanted I liked finance. My mother told me that's what I should do with my life, so that's what I did at 17. What do you know? So I was in the 80s, so I was at a Jesuit school. It was mostly male dominated. My class I was one of the few females, and we were in a class, being the Jesuits, we were talking about homelessness, and it was an ethics class, and it was an elective. And I loved school. I just listened. I did what I was, I tried not to memorize, regurgitate, and forget, as one of my teachers kept saying. It's not a good idea to do that. In this one class, though, we had a debate about homelessness, and it was the first time that I felt emotion, let's just say that. Blood boiling was kind of another way to describe it, because I was surprised to learn that people were actually had the view that most people that were homeless should just pull themselves up by their bootstraps, and they'd be fine if they just did that. And I thought, everyone is born into the situation they're born into, and not everyone is as lucky as somebody else. So you don't always have the resources to be able to do that. And so I was really kind of enraged by that moment, and it was a turning point, because I was back at my apartment with my roommates, ranting and raving, and one of them stopped me in my tracks when she said, "What are you going to do about it?"
Good question.
Yeah, and I said, I actually really, it was a turning point. I wanted to do the Peace Corps, but my mother, she said, "You've never been out of Baltimore or Washington, D.C. is where I'm from, so you probably shouldn't go to another country right now." And so I ended up doing some volunteer work in Colorado, running a soup kitchen and an outreach center with some volunteers, and doing some work there, and then really got to know the nonprofit sector. And I thought, well, this is really great. I can broker resources, not on Wall Street, not somewhere else, but in a bank or whatever, but I could do it with, in the nonprofit sector. And so that's how I discovered it. That's how I fell in love with it. And then I came back to the East Coast and became a community organizer, where I learned about the power of the human spirit. I mean, I worked with so many people throughout the state of Maryland on water quality issues, but it was really about their passion for making life better for themselves, their families, and their communities, and what they could do if they were supported with tools. And so leadership development, community organizing, seeing transformation in communities as a result of people coming together with those tools. And I thought, well, providing tools and providing resources is just what you need to mobilize, people to make change, and we can do anything. I really believe that. Yeah. That's the optimism. Now you're seeing it come through.
We should make a commercial out of this. But it sounds like you're in your sweet spot. I mean, because you're using a little of the finance
and the business
thing,
yeah,
and the
I
business
love that.
thing.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
But then you have a heart, and you're into organizing and together. It's great. I think what happened to me was my heart was broken for what I saw. And it's like you can't go back. I mean, maybe
you can't unsee that.
You can't unsee it. And it's like, okay, I'm done. Yeah. I'm cooked. I was actually in finance too, but once it happened to me, it was like, okay, I'm doing this, kind of thing. But it's almost like a little bug you get.
It's a calling.
It's a calling. It is a calling.
Yes.
How are you liking Santa Barbara?
What's not to like? It's so beautiful. I know.
We got a lot of wildlife going out here, but
I know. It makes me just wish that everyone that I know in the whole world could come and see it. I feel really blessed and privileged to be here. Yeah.
Well, we're thankful for you.
No, thank you.
Thanks for what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming. We'll see you next time. This is Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. Exciting show today. Coach John Moore, the basketball coach for the last 27 years, recently retired at Westmont College, is with us. John's just a wonderful man. Has lived a great life, has some great insights. So stay tuned. You're not going to want to miss it. John Moore on Good Life, coming up next. Hi, this is Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. I have a special guest today. Coach John Moore is with me. Coach Moore has been at Westmont College for 27 years. Has just left the head coaching position, but he's staying on at the college as a professor and associate athletic director. He's been a friend of mine. In fact, we got to Westmont in a way in the same year, in 1993. That's when I arrived. Yeah. Little fanfare. When you came back to be the head coach at your alma mater after Fresno Pacific and so forth. So I feel like a little connection.
Yeah,
to
we
you.
graduated together.
Right. You
But I
stayed a little
around.
longer
It took me a
than
little
I did.
longer to graduate.
You're right. Coach Moore had over 32 years as a head coach. He had 637 wins. He was the National Coach of the Year this year for the NAI, which I believe is the first time that's ever happened in Westmont history. The team was top ranked this year. Didn't get to have a tournament because of COVID-19. So bizarre, kind of crazy circumstances to end on. And maybe we'll start there. How did you handle that with the team?
Well, I'm on this NABC board
Yep,
of directors,
right.
and I'm the only NAI coach on there. And the day it was announced, we had a board call at 8 o'clock in the morning. And Mike Bray, the Notre Dame coach, who's the president of the NABC board this year, just went off. He said, hey, I'm going to my shoot around. And he was, Notre Dame's in the Big East. And he said, hey, hope the board call goes well, but I'm going to my shoot around, as though the tournament was still on. And we talked about it. We got to the end of the call, our call, and it seemed like full speed ahead. An hour and a half later, I get an email from the president of the NAI, Jim Carr, saying the tournament has been canceled. My longest walk ever up to Westmont. We live on Chelham Way. It's a walk up to the college. And when I got there, Jeff Azen had already rallied the troops. And so Coach Boucher, Coach Goodrow, Jeff, and the whole team was there. And times have changed, Dean. They all already knew.
Oh,
So you can imagine what social media can,
right.
can do
Right.
for you. And
Right.
I thought I was going to surprise them, but there was no surprise to be had, because you could tell the
They knew.
puffy cheeks and the teary-eyed. And so we sat in the room and we cried and said it can't be so. And then we went out that afternoon and we had a practice.
Really?
We decided to have a practice anyway. And we had a really enjoyable time together. And that was my last practice at Westmont College. And it was their last practice for this past year, at least. And so it was nostalgic and sad at the same time.
Wow. And you were the coach of the year, and you were heading into the tournament as a 2-seed?
We were.
Oh, yeah, that's a tough one.
And it was a team that we were finally completely healthy. Everybody was back. We had practiced for about a week with everybody in tow, and it felt like we were finally back to where we had been earlier in the year, with everybody healthy again. And so we liked our chances. We really liked our chances. And I don't say that very often, but we did like our chances.
Yeah. Well, God is still good.
Still good.
Yeah, still good. But that's got to be a huge disappointment.
Yep.
You got to Westmont. You were a non-believer. You came for 2 years. Were you at Cypress?
I was at Cypress College.
Okay.
Yep.
And you transferred in, recruited by Chet Kammerer. And you talked about you and Chet Kammerer one time took a drive to Angel Stadium to watch a game and hang out with a recruit. And on the drive, he said, if I gave you a book called Mere Christianity, would you read it? And you said that book's been with you since.
Yeah.
Talk about what happened with your faith journey at Westmont, after Westmont, and kind of that journey for you.
Yeah. Well, here's a little caveat. He said, hey, if I give you a book, will you read it? And I said, sure.
Before he gave you the title?
And then he said, it was Mere Christianity. And I was not a believer at the time. But my respect for Chet, my respect for my teammates, encouraged me to do that. So I came into Westmont a non-believer, and people prayed me into the kingdom. People like Chet Kammerer, Mark Miller, whose 3 sons I've had the privilege to coach. One of them works with your brother, Johnny Miller does. And so I read that book more out of respect for Chet than interest in the topic. And that changed my life. In fact, I have it. I wake up every morning and I read Proverbs, and I read, right now I'm in Matthew, and I have Mere Christianity right there. Those are my 3 staples, with my bran flakes and my oatmeal flakes. Yeah.
Coffee? No coffee?
I'm not a coffee
You're
drinker.
not a coffee
No. In fact, I've got 3 people in the house who are coffee drinkers, and I'd be competing for their coffee if I was a coffee drinker. But I have no interest in coffee at all. Never have. Love the smell, hate the taste. Yeah. But that was my faith journey. It began right about that time. Came to faith right after my senior year at Westmont, and then I wanted to come back more than anything to be able to recruit people who were like me. People without faith, or people struggling in their faith, or people who have deep faith, and I recruited all 3 of those quite heavily, and that was kind of my approach. That I wanted people who were interested in being ministered to. I wanted to be a missionary. I wanted our players to be missionaries, and I wanted people who were seeking to find more depth in their life, and that's what I got to do in the context of basketball.
Yeah.
And one of the guys I got to coach was your brother Johnny.
Oh yeah,
what a privilege! Yeah, good. I can't wait.
You were known. In fact, I know this firsthand because I played intramural, I think, a couple times against you, and you were tough. I mean, you were known as a tough, gritty competitor, as a player and as a coach. I used to sit across in the front row from you. Do you remember? By the way, do you remember our thing called the coaching staff?
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay, so for the viewers who don't know, we would 10 of us dress up like Coach Moore, suit and tie, and we would have clipboards, and we'd be in the front row directly across from the coach. And I was kind of the ringleader, probably.
No doubt.
I probably matured. I hope I matured since then, maybe a little. But I'd work the refs up and down the sideline. As coaches working the refs, we're over there working the refs back and forth. So that was
double team.
Yeah, we're double teaming the refs. And the refs kind of going, what are these guys? What are they doing? But you had this tough reputation. And I read something that you said in terms of, tough player, gritty, hard-nosed, and then you brought the Princeton offense, which was a revolutionary thing for Westmont and changed, I think, everything from my perspective as I saw that come into play, which is incredible to watch. But you said something. You said you don't have a philosophy of coaching until you get to 15 years as a head coach. You said, I discounted that idea originally, but then at that point in the 15-year range, I realized that I had a philosophy of coaching that makes it more meaningful and more meaningful for my players. What is that philosophy?
Yeah.
How would you describe that?
Well, I'm going to go back to something you said earlier. When you say tough, gritty about a player, that usually means they're unskilled. And so that's what I was. I was tough and I was gritty because I was less skilled than the next guy. No, I know you didn't, but I know what the back end meaning of that is. At least for me it was. And I was just fortunate enough to play for great coaches. I want to go back to my Cypress coach. He was John Wooden's first All-American. And so there was a connection to John Wooden through Don Johnson. And Don Johnson was one of my favorite men in the world, and I was one of his favorites as well. He just passed away about 1.5 years ago, and I got to speak at his memorial, and that was an incredible privilege. And then you go from Don Johnson, John Wooden and Don Johnson, to Chet Kammerer. I couldn't have had 2 better college coaches than the two that I had.
Wow. And
Chet cared deeply for my soul, and Don cared for me as a person. And he was a Renaissance man, Don was. And Chet was just born and bred Indiana Hoosier with goodness deep in his heart. And he wanted me to experience his Savior. And he prayed me into a space where he was able to kind of encourage me to look at the kingdom in a little deeper way than I ever had. And so that was the difference maker. Back to your question about philosophy. I haven't forgotten. So my philosophy in that first 15 years, or first 10 years at Westmont, I was 5 years elsewhere at Fresno Pacific. My philosophy was we want to play an aggressive brand of basketball. We want to play aggressive defensively, we want to play aggressive offensively, and then we talk a lot about that. But now my philosophy comes down to one sentence. And I think it says everything about what Westmont was about, at least when I was there, trying to be about. We want every single basket to come via the assist. And that you've never seen. You've never seen a box score. High school, college, NBA, where every single basket has come via the assist. About 4 or 5 years ago, we had 50 baskets in a game. We had 44 assists.
Really?
88% of the baskets came via the assist. When we lost the national championship game in 2015, we had one game where we were within 3 or 4 of assists to total baskets. And what that means is you're sharing the ball. You're really kind of sharing the ball in a way where everybody gets credit. And so our guys get giddy on the bench when they see a guy passing the ball to another guy for a basket. They jump up and down, not for the dunk, but for the extra pass or the pass that leads to a basket. And I think that's symbolic of how best to lead in a family situation, in raising kids. If you have the ball being passed, then you're sharing it, and you have a chance to not be egotistical. And you mentioned a word earlier, I think maybe it was before it was John Davies said this earlier about listening. Listening is about passing. Because listening is you have to kind of open up your ears to what the other person has to say. In passing, you have to be more interested in what the other person can do than what you do alone. And you get a little bit of credit with an assist, but you don't get the same kind of accolades that you do with a basket. And so I love the pass. I love what the pass means. And so our philosophy is we want every single basket to come via the assist. And if you have that mentality as a framework, then your culture changes pretty dramatically.
Yeah. That's amazing. That's interesting. And I happen to know you had 422 assists, ranked number 4 all time, and you did it in 2 seasons. So you passed the ball a fair amount.
Like I said, because I couldn't shoot the ball, I had to pass the ball. I had to
I
find a way to be important.
See, as a basketball player, I was short, but I was slow. So I had the lateral mobility of an oak tree. So that didn't really work out for me, but I digress. Coach, if you were talking to, and you're on the national board with John Calipari and all these heavy hitters, but I guess one of my thoughts this morning was, if you were talking to a young coach or somebody who was interested in coaching and felt like that was part of their gifting, what is the opportunity for a coach? What is the biggest opportunity for a coach?
So I speak at these events, and I'll be talking about whatever the topic may be, and there's always a young kid coach in the crowd, and he'll raise his hand at halfway through maybe and say, "Coach, how come they're not built the way we were in our time?" And this guy's 25, and I'm a little bit older. And I said, "What do you mean by that?" And he goes, "Well, they just don't do the kinds of things that we did." And I said, "Well, here's a message for you. You're not going to like hearing what I'm about to tell you. If they're not like how you want them to be, that's not on them. That is on you." So you have to find a way to teach and to coach and to bring them along to the space that they need to get to. And we've never been at a perfect place. We'll never get to a perfect place. But we are further and closer to that perfect place than we ever have been because of parents, because of coaches, and because of teachers we've had. So I say back to that young coach, your work is yet to be done. So make sure that so I was on a call earlier today with a bunch of younger coaches, and a Zoom call, and they were talking back and forth, and I didn't say a word until one of the coaches said, "Well, let's hear from Coach Moore." And they were talking about connectedness. And he said the best way to be connected to others is to be more about listening than about talking. And that is all about humility. My favorite chapter in that book you spoke about earlier, Mere Christianity, is this chapter number 8 on humility. And if you can only read one chapter in Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, read that chapter, because it will take you to your knees, and it'll take you to a place where you realize how important it is to understand others than thinking about what it is to be understood by somebody else. So I just seek out ways in which I can listen more effectively and be a little bit more understanding of others. And I think that's what I would suggest to a young coach. Make it more about them than it is about you.
That's good. That's so good. I'm going to ask you about a bunch of different people, but I wanted to ask you about one kind of a rival coach, Dave Holmquist, who I thought it was really honoring what he said about you when you retired. He said, he quoted Bear Bryant, I think, but he said, Coach Moore is the kind of guy, he can take his players and beat yours, or he can take your players and beat his. I thought that's a pretty high honor. You had a lot of battles with Dave Holmquist over the years. What was that like? And Bill O'Dell, and I know there's been a lot of coaches that have kind of been around a long time. And what are those relationships like? I'm curious.
Well, let's go to Dave Holmquist to start with. And what you don't know is Dave recruited me.
Oh, he did?
So he was at Fresno Pacific. I was at, I wasn't anywhere. I was at Cypress College. And he was a Cypress College guy. So he played for Don Johnson as well. So we had a really strong connection. And the day I called Chet first to let him know I was coming to Westmont, because I knew if I had tried to call Dave first, he would try to convince me otherwise. So I called Chet, and then I called Dave, and I teared up. In fact, I probably more than just teared up. I cried when I told Dave that I wasn't coming to play for him. So he's been a friend for 40-some years.
Wow.
And we've had a great rivalry, but more importantly, we have an incredible amount of respect for one another. And I bet if you were to kind of check our records against one another, I bet it's almost 500.
Yeah, right.
I bet if you were to kind of look back at that, I bet we're right there 500 against one another. And Dave's 8 wins away from 1,000. He's 8 wins away from 1,000 victories. And he's one of the finest coaches, but he's also one of the greatest men I've ever been around.
That's
and so
great.
Dear friend, was recruited by him, but also a guy who just, I think he's got 2 PhDs, maybe a third. He's got 3 or 4 master's degrees. Just an incredible Renaissance man in a really important way. And we talk, 2 or 3 times a week.
Do you really?
Still, yeah.
He says you're the greatest coach he ever coached against, which is a high compliment from him. I saw him at Vaughn's like 6 months ago.
Okay.
And I've never met him, but I'm just looking at it. He probably wondered if I was stalking him or what. I'm like, I think that's Dave Holmquist. So you must feel like you won the lottery in terms of Don Johnson, Dave Holmquist, Chet Kammerer. Of course, you married into the Lavin family.
Yeah.
I mean, you've had quite a circle.
Yeah.
That's probably had a big impact on you, just all these Cap Lavin and all these people that have been in your life, basketball people, but deep character people, amazing people.
Yeah.
Would you say?
Well, you mentioned my father-in-law, Cap. And Cap he's the epitome of, that Dos Equis commercial, the most interesting man in the world?
Right.
They got it wrong. It wasn't him, it was Cap Lavin. And Cap Lavin was, the first guy invited by the Harlem, maybe the only guy in that era, invited by the Harlem Globetrotters to be a part of their team. Not the Washington Generals, but the Harlem Globetrotters.
Really?
And, here's this guy being invited in the 50s, and that tells you the kind of ability he had to play the game of basketball. And he was a Hall of Famer in San Francisco, Hall of Famer at USF. Could have played professionally, but back in the early 50s, playing professionally wasn't what it is today in the NBA. And Cap's just one of the all-time greats. But the greatest coach I've ever been coached by is my wife. Not even close. Not even close. As good as Don was, as good as Chet was, as good as Dave Holmquist is, as good as Cap Lavin is, my wife is the greatest coach I've ever been around.
That is wonderful.
And she was the eldest of 6 kids, and Steve Lavin's the youngest of 6, so she had to coach Steve, and she had to coach her siblings, and she then got stuck with coaching somebody even harder than her siblings, and that's me. And she coaches me up every single day, even today. She gave me a haircut before I came, and I hadn't had a haircut in 10 weeks, and so I was more presentable for the Dean Wilson Show. I know it's not the Dean Wilson Show, but I call it the Dean Wilson Show. And so, yes, I did hit the lottery. And I hit the lottery when I walked down the aisle, and I got a chance to see my wife walk towards me. And 30 years of marriage as of September 15th, and greatest coach I've ever known.
Oh, that's wonderful. What is your vision, or what is your thought process? I know this transition's happening with you and stepping out of the head coaching, which is going to be weird for me, among others, but we're trying to get over it. What is your vision as you think about the next 10 years and Westmont, your family? I know you have 2 wonderful daughters. What look like? Not that you have it all planned out, but what is your vision for this season, this next season?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked. I'm so glad you asked. God has something planned for me. So the head of the NABC board is a guy named Jim Haney. And Jim Haney was the head coach at Oregon, and he's been the president, the executive director of the NABC for the last 20 years or so. Great man, a little over 20 years, I think it is. And so when I was preparing to make the announcement, I gave Jim a call on the phone. And he said, John, I woke up this morning early knowing I was going to have this 10 o'clock call with you. And God just kept speaking to me. And here's what he said. And Jim said about 10 things in a row. And after each one, saith the Lord, saith the Lord, saith the Lord. 10 straight times. And then he goes, and here's the last important message, really important message for you, John. Do not run into anything. Wait. And that's what I've been doing for the last 10 weeks. And I'm going to be waiting for a good while longer, because I think there is something in store, something yet to be done, something God that has for me that he's going to put out to me on a platter.
Yep.
And we'll find out what that is.
Yeah.
But it is something that I would not have been allowed to do if I'd still been coaching for the next few years. And so I know that there is something in store, and I can't wait to see what it is.
I can't wait to see it either. You're an incredible writer. So I don't know if that's on the list, but I think you should write. Yeah. Every time I get one, I responded back to you. You never respond back to me when I respond back to you, by the way. Kind of offended by that. But,
I'm sorry.
But the letter you sent out to the coaches circle after your announcement was so powerful. So I don't know if the Lord has writing in store, but I'd read it.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, and I think there may be some possibilities there. And I, on that last coaches circle, I don't think I've responded to anyone, Dean. So you're in good company. You're in good company. It's been last 10 weeks have been a time in which I've been celebrated by a lot of people, and what you wrote to me was just so sweet to get that from you. But it's a little bit like too much cake. Right. Too much ice cream, too much celebration. You start to wonder whether that's really you they're talking about. And so I think you have to be careful, and I haven't responded to quite a number of people just because I'm taking it in, and I'm going to find a time in which to do that in the most present of ways and the most sincere of ways as well. And I do love writing. My mom was a great writer. Cappy Lavin was a great writer. My daughter, Jessie, is an unbelievable writer. She'll write a book before I will because she's gifted in that way. And I have a daughter by the name of Jacqueline who's a great speaker. And so I've got a great writer in one, I've got a great speaker in another. Back to the man who is Dos Equis commercial, but it's really Cap Lavin. There are interesting people in the world, Dean, and those are the great storytellers. There are interested people in the world that are the great listeners. Very few people are both. But Cap Lavin is one.
Wow.
He's a great storyteller. He was a great listener. My daughter Jacqueline is a great storyteller. She's a great listener. Steve Lavin was a great storyteller, is a great storyteller, and is a great listener. And that's why he's the best. If he gets back into Division I coaching, almost every year he's the top recruiter. The number one recruiting class in the year is Steve Lavin's. He is very, very gifted.
Wow. What a family. So that's wonderful. I want to close with, we only have a few minutes, but I'm going to just give you a name. This will be a little lightning round.
Okay,
I'll give you a name and give me a few sentences or whatever about the person. Some of these are former players. Some of them are other categories. Brian Gomes.
Maybe best ever.
Yeah.
And today, a dear friend. We just texted back and forth. A couple days ago, I sent him a picture of my daughter making me lunch, and his son is Drew, and his daughter is, I'll think of her name, Camille, and she goes by Mimi, I think, or Mealy, I think is what he calls her. And he said, "I got to teach them how to make me lunch."
So you sent him a picture?
I sent him a picture of Jacqueline making me lunch, and he goes, "I got to get my 5 and 7-year-old or 4 and 6-year-old or whatever they
trained."
So it's a little early.
Daniel Carlin.
Well, I just got a text this morning from Daniel, and the sad story about Daniel is that I think we would have won a national championship if Daniel had been healthy for that last game. And Daniel and I sat in the hospital together after we lost that game, and it was such a tenuous circumstance, and that's our memory. That's one of our fondest memories, is sitting in the hospital together, helping him get to the other side. Wow. And he's another very dear friend of mine today.
Chris Clark.
Gosh, you're picking out some great ones. Chris, I would say what I love most about Chris is how much he grew up during the time. Mm-hmm. He came in with a group of guys who had been freshmen together. Adrian Phillips, Mitch Pierce, Ryan Tillery, Will Gully. Those are all guys who came in together. And Chris came in as a sophomore. But he acclimated to those guys. That's one of the tightest group of players I've ever had, and it's because those other four guys really welcomed Chris well. And then Chris just kind of fit in well. One of the greatest scorers I've ever had. He was a big time.
What about Adrian Phillips?
AP was
all-time steals leader.
Yeah, all-time steals leader. But AP was an unbelievable leader right away. He was a great leader as a freshman, and then just got better each year along the way. And so it culminated with a phenomenal career. 3 out of 4 years, they made it to the national tournament. Probably the best game Westmont's ever played at the national tournament was AP's junior year, and we beat a team that was quite good, and Adrian had a phenomenal game, and so did Mitch and Till and Will Gully as well. But
wow.
Yeah.
Joe Kearns.
Yeah, Joe. Well, we share something, which is we're lefties.
Right.
And I had really long hair,
right.
And he had really long hair. And no, Joe's one of my all-time favorites just because he cared so much, and he was a great defender. He talked about getting in people's grills, and then since then, I think what Joe cares so much about is the families of the people who work for him. Mm-hmm. And we were trying to get him more involved in some things we were doing in Westmont basketball. And he said, I'll only do it if I can continue to support all the families, that it can't get in the way of my job, because my priority is to make sure that there's food on the table and that the people who work for me can be as successful as possible. That's
so great.
Everything in the world about Joe to me.
So wonderful. Dr. David Winter.
Oh, gosh. He's my president. He's my president. He's a president that I came to Westmont with. He's a president that I got a chance to come back to Westmont with. He called me on the phone. I was in the kitchen. Rachel picked the phone up back in the day when there were things called a landline. And Rachel handed me the phone. It's Dr. Winter. And he said to me, I want to offer you the job back at Westmont. And I'll remember where I was in Hieronymus Lounge when I came back, and they did a huge press conference. And I remember exactly where David was and what he said to me to make me feel as though I was coming back to the greatest job ever. And I was. And that springtime, as I came back, I was driving between Fresno and Westmont. I was staying on campus, and I would walk through the formal gardens, and I would pray this prayer: never allow me to take this for granted.
Yeah.
And I continue to pray that even on this day, in these days. But I always will go by the statue of David and Helene, and I'll put my hand on one of their shoulders and put my other hand on the other shoulder, just because I'm so devoted to and committed to their standards of what they brought to Westmont. Helene and Dave is who I'm talking about, and Helene to this day is one of my favorite people in this town. And so it's not just David, it's David and Helene, and Helene and David. Yeah.
That's wonderful. My little brother Johnny.
Yeah.
He's not little anymore.
No.
My big brother, younger brother.
Yeah.
What was he like?
Well, what Johnny did, I knew Johnny when he was, you would bring Johnny to early morning hoops.
Right.
And for those who don't know, Dean and I used to play 6 a.m. basketball together. And then Dean brought Johnny. And Johnny was 12, 13, somewhere in there, 12, 13, 14. And he was about as confident a 12-year-old amongst men, playing amongst men. And that's who Johnny is. I think Johnny's a very confident young man. And he was confident as a player, but he was more confident as a leader. And I think Johnny became captain his senior year because of the leader that he is. And we were really good his senior year, and we went to the national tournament his senior year. Hadn't been for a few years before that. And so Johnny and Sant and that group of guys, they took us to the national tournament, but it was Johnny's leadership that really made us the kind of team that we were.
I love it. Jeff Azen.
The best. He's the best. He and I have been together for 27 years. Jeff could have been a head coach 10 times over. In fact, if he had stepped into my role, he would have done it better than I did. And I'm not being falsely humble. I really, really believe that to be true, which tells you the kind of sacrifice he was willing to make for all those years. And he's just the best, and he's the best in so many different ways. I mean, he was an assistant under Chet Cameron, was an assistant under Jeff Crosby, was an assistant under me for 27 years. He's going to continue on with Landon Boucher. You know, I can talk all I want about humility. Jeff Azen lives it out.
Wow.
He lives it out in how
so
willing he is to serve and how loyal he is to Westmont basketball and how wanting he is for players to have the best experience possible.
Yeah.
And if I had a little more time, I'd tell a story that Johnny told about Jeff. In fact, I'm going to take a little more time.
Go ahead.
Johnny said when he came in as a freshman, all the seniors were just bragging about Ace. And he said, sophomore year, freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, he said, what's the big deal about A's? What's the big deal about A's? Then he got to his senior year, and he realized A's was waiting. He wasn't allowing people to have a piece of himself until they had paid their dues. And by the time Johnny got to his senior year, he had paid his dues. And he realized how valuable it was to have a piece of A's. Wow. Because A's had saved himself for when Johnny finally earned the right to have a piece of Jeff Azen.
Oh, that's
and so A's is loyal to the hilt, and I think Johnny knows what that means, and I think we all know what that means, but the best. He's the best.
Well, we got to close. We're out of time, but I want to encourage people who are watching, since it's not a surprise, but we're going to honor Coach Moore at our December event, Legacy of Service event, the Rosewood Miramar on December 15th. We've got a couple other names coming that we're going to announce, but we thought of you, Coach, and you've had an impact on the community, in these players' lives that goes on and on. Just a guy like me was just a random student, but I just always liked you, loved you, looked up to you. I feel like you're pastoral in a sense in the community. I feel like you're just wonderful. So I just want to honor you. Thank you for your years, and I look forward to seeing what's next and what God shows you. So thanks for coming on.
Well, this has been an honor to be with you and to receive that award. I love this city. I love the Turner Foundation. I love what you did on the west side, and I'd go over there and visit you on the west side. And I love Westmont. I love our college, and it is our college because we share it in the same. It's our alma mater, and so I think the best is yet to come, Dean.
Yeah.
The best is yet to come for Westmont. The best is yet to come for Westmont basketball. Can't wait to see what Landon does in the way of the cupboard is full, and I can't wait to see what next year brings for him and for Rob and for A's. But I think the best is yet to come for me as well, and I can't wait to see what God has in store for me. And,
I believe that.
But what a privilege it is to be here, and thanks for allowing me to spend some time with you in this wonderful backyard.
Yeah, great. Thanks, John. Appreciate it. We'll see you next time.